the main issue that I had in being in the neighborhood, which is why I wasn't in it for very long, was
I wanna have it all right now, but sometimes you gotta wait for the good thing. Feel like we're going round and round, but sometimes you gotta wait for the good thing.
So he's the former drummer for The Neighbourhood. You may know him from his songs Vegas Baby or his new song Lucy with Skizzy Mars. Please welcome Olivver The Kid to the podcast. How are you doing today?
Hey, how's it going? Thanks for having me. Sorry I'm late.
No worries, no worries. So I just kind of wanted to know, what was your first music experience like, or kind of how did you get into music?
Yeah, I was into music from a young age. I think a funny story my parents always told was that I went to a Rolling Stones concert when I was 5 and I fell asleep without earplugs or anything. So That was, I think they knew I was going to be into loud music at some point. But my dad actually forced me, not forced me, but really pushed me into drum lessons when I was 9.
Mm-hmm.
When I was didn't want to have a lesson for anything. I was just let me play Pokemon and be done with it. Because he played guitar, my brother was taking bass lessons, so my dad wanted to jam with his kids. So I played music for a while. It took a couple years for me to really find my love for it and passion for it, and then started being in bands when I was 14, 15. And then when I went to New Orleans for college, I started playing a lot more guitar and doing open mics.
Yeah, nice.
And then the neighborhood stuff happened, and was with them for a couple years and did the first EP, first album, helped on the mixtape that came out, and then have been doing Olivver The Kid, 1990 Nowhere, La Bouquet, some of the projects I've done since.
Yeah. So what's kind of your motivation for trying all these projects along with your solo project? You're doing all these things. What was kind of the motivation behind that rather than just sticking to one?
I've always been kind of the old saying, people contain multitudes. I've always felt like I'm an amalgamation of a bunch of stuff. I've never really tried or wanted to fit inside a single box. Even in high school, I had long hair that I would straighten. I'm in bands, and I'm also the middle linebacker on the football team. And I'm also playing basketball, and I'm, huge into Yu-Gi-Oh, but also a camp counselor for 4 years. I've just kind of always lived in different worlds, and I've never wanted to just kind of... You also have, as a musician, I know that downtime is super important, but when you're not touring or in an album cycle, there's a lot of downtime.
Yeah.
And for somebody like me who's lived alone pretty much my whole life since I moved out, that time at a certain point you need to start filling. It
just gets boring.
Yeah, and so, whether it's writing songs on guitar or having ideas for projects or, wanting to... I did the solo thing for a while after The Neighborhood, and then I missed, true collaboration. I missed, jamming in, a garage. And so that's why I started doing La Bouquet, and then now...
So it's kind of experimentation or exploration, wanting to see what it could be like in different group settings, alone, different sounds maybe. Just kind of seeing what's out there, testing the waters.
Totally. That's what's fun about music. You could... I could sit in a room forever and just write the same 4 chords and write the same song and just reflavor it every couple years and put out the same kind of shit. But that's not why for a lot of people, eventually music becomes about money and becomes about a job. But we all got into it because of a passion for it, because it tickles something in your brain when you are listening to it or playing it that you just go, yeah, this is sick. Yeah. And so I'm just trying to continue to have that, because I still get that, but I think partly why I get that is because I'm
Because you're trying so many things.
trying to still have it,
Yeah.
and like I'm actively searching different ways to keep that
and so
spark alive.
So with all these projects, so you the person, but beyond the artist, you the person, you're Bryan. You've, like you said, you had all these things, camp counselor, music, so many things. What is kind of Oliver the Kid, La Bouquet? What kind of goes into all these names? Where, if you don't mind, can we kind of break them down one by one and just see what the inspiration behind the names kind of were?
Yeah, so Oliver the Kid was my solo music. When I first started playing guitar, I had a poetry club in high school with my friend Katya. And when I would turn some of the poetry I was writing into like little songs that were like barely songs, like 2 chords back and forth the whole time, like not really a verse or chorus. They're always like a minute and a half long. But I went by the name The Next Macbeth, which came from me being stoned out of my mind watching a movie with my friend, and Liam Neeson was on the screen, and my buddy said, Liam Neeson's like the next Macbeth. And we both started crying laughing because he didn't even know what he meant or what the fuck he was talking about. But I was like 16 or 15. Mm-hmm. And then when I started to actually write music and like to release it, I was like, I should change the name. And I wanted to legally change my name to Oliver. Oh, yeah. I just sat and thought about what name do I like. This is when I was living in Santa Barbara. And then I went to change it, and it turns out it cost money. And at the time, I was working, I was going to community college in Santa Barbara City College, even though I was accepted to college in New Orleans because it was too expensive. Mm-hmm. And I was working full-time at Urban Outfitters on State Street for 2 years. So I changed it to Oliver, and then after the Neighbourhood, my lawyer was like, there's already an Oliver, and that's such a common name, you might want to like zhuzh it up a little bit, give it a little something extra. Mm-hmm. And so it was between Oliver James, because James is my middle name, or Oliver the Kid. In retrospect, I maybe would have went with Oliver James, just now that I'm 31, and I'm no longer really that young. I'm still young, but... and so Oliver the Kid was like Billy the Kid, like, you know, an old outlaw kind of vibe. So that was that one. La Bouquet was... I was actually making the first La Bouquet album as an Oliver the Kid album. And then I saw The Cure at the Hollywood Bowl. And I was like, these like 60, 70-year-old guys are still playing music, live music, at the Hollywood Bowl. That's what I want. Like, that's the dream, is to like be 70 and still making music with your buds. So I turned that album into a band album with my buddy Jake. And then we got eventually on my friend Drew, and we had we had Guy, Justin, Eric, David, Ryan, Daniel. A lot of people helped with that band over the years. I was the only person who was in it from the beginning to the end. Yeah. And then La Bouquet was like, we wanted something romantic, kind of like My Bloody Valentine, or something. And I wanted the bouquet in there. And technically, in French, it's Le Bouquet, L-E. Yeah. But I was like, we won't be Googleable. And so I was like, why don't I switch it to La? Because we're also from L.A. Mm-hmm. So like a double entendre. And if you Google it, it's incorrect grammar in French. So we'll do the first one. So we'll just
give you like the definition of it.
Yeah. Yeah. And then that ended, and 1990 Nowhere was a collaborative group between me and Lost Boy Crow and our producer Sam Beresford, who was in a band called Armors, and now he's in a band called Winnetka Bowling League. And we had some help early on from another guy that was in Armors named Olin. And basically, when we were thinking of, we were just doing it for fun. That band is literally like, we were all professional musicians who do it for a living. We were like, let's get in a room and make some songs.
Just have fun.
With no ulterior motives. Let's just do it and just see what happens. Mm-hmm. And so we had a bunch of goofy names first. I think we had like the Denton County Royals Like we wanted to sound like a high school football team.
Yeah, I was gonna say sounds like a sports team rather than like
Yeah.
a band or something.
And Denton County is in Texas, and it's a place that I heard about first from a song from the Mountain Goats. That song called "The Best Ever Death Metal Band at a Denton" is a cool Mountain Goat song. But we had that. We had a song called we had named Uncle Steve because we all have uncles named Steve. But then we were like, isn't that, I don't know, we were just like, I think we overthought it because like at one point we're like, is that like creepy? Like some people are like creeped out by like uncles, and like we're all like, at least me and Chris were like getting older. Like we kind of look like older guys. Like I don't know, it just like started to rub us the wrong way. So like, let's not do that. Yeah. We were almost the gavel makers, which is completely just an inside joke about like a gavel that a judge. We had one in the studio, and whenever we all really agreed on an idea, we'd bang a gavel. So we had a bunch of ideas, and then Chris had 1990 Nowhere, which he mentioned to me, not even in the context of the band, a long time ago, and then at one point, I just remembered it, and I was like, Chris, what about that name? Me and Chris are both born in 1990, so we were like, why don't we do that? Because our stuff is hearkening very much back to when we were kids, jamming in garages, listening to Weezer. So
yeah. And so
Neighbourhood, I can't fully take credit for, but it was originally like Jesse James. It was originally going to be Jesse James and the Outlaws. When it was me, Jesse, and Jeremy. That's how long it's been. And then I went to college, and then Zach and Mikey came on board, and then it went from Jesse James and the Outlaws to Jesse James Presents The Neighborhood, because we're all from the suburbs pretty much, and then it just became The Neighborhood with the British spelling. I think just because it was cool.
Just for fun.
Googleable as well.
Yeah. So with your time, like, for these projects where you've been the mainstay and people have been cycling in and out, and then something like The Neighborhood where you kind of came in and left, what is kind of what do you see as, like, the vibe when you're someone who's anchoring the project and you're there all the time rather than someone, like, part of the cycle coming in and out?
It depends. I mean, the main issue that I had in being in The Neighborhood, which is why I wasn't in it for very long, was that my love that I found for drums eventually faded. I still love drums, but I don't want to be a drummer forever.
Yeah.
I'm first and foremost, like, if someone was like, what's your greatest strength? I would be like lyrics, like, before anything else. And then like songwriting and rhythm and ideas and building a narrative, and then probably drums. So I think in the other things, I'm more involved in, like, what's the song about? Whereas in The Neighborhood, when we were going into album 2, it kind of became very much so like, you'll do the drums.
Yeah.
Whereas on album 1, I think I had that wasn't at least explicitly said, so I was like...
You had, like, still a good amount of creative input, kind of.
Yeah, rather than just drums and stuff. And so eventually I was like, this train's moving, and it's gonna do well forever, but am I gonna look back at my life when I'm 70, and even if I'm loaded or whatever, I mean, not that they're loaded, but let's say at the time, we were on trajectory to be the Killers, we were on trajectory to be U2 after how well our first album did. But I was like, I'm going to look back when I'm 70 and like kick myself for like not giving like songwriting and lyrics and that a chance to kind of shine. Cause I've always written. Before I went to New Orleans, when I was in Santa Barbara, I was a creative writing major.
Yeah.
And that's what I got my AA in from community college. It's creative writing and then liberal arts. And then for a long time, I thought I'd be a teacher, teaching like English or creative writing. And I was like writing short stories, kind of being very creative and collaborative with friends of mine who were making comic books and like just kind of contributing all around. And so that's the main difference, I think, is for the other stuff, like I like being more involved in that, even if it's not my idea, because I love collaboration. Like I think I just worked on something recently that like started as a blue pebble and ended as Mickey Mouse upside down in a vortex. Like from that to that, like they don't. How are those things related? But that's what the process of collaboration brought us to, and it's just beautiful because I like taking something that I love and letting go of it, and having somebody else be able to take it, somebody that I trust, able to take it and add to it. Or I like taking somebody else's idea that they're letting go of and trusting me with, and being like, oh, let me Bryan this shit up. Like, I got my paints out, I'm ready to go. Boom. And then what we're left with is a beautiful, most of the time. So I think that's the main difference. I had a spell where I was writing a lot for other people, which felt very kind of much so like I felt similarly to like my days in the neighborhood, where like this is like lucrative, but is this as fulfilling as I still do write for other people, but I do it less because I had a spirit where I was doing it over and over and over again, and I was like, this isn't creatively fulfilling me, and I'm not just trying to monetize every second of my life. I'm cool with making less money if it means I'm happier.
Because that's really just comes down to like priorities and what's really important in life. And and when you do that shit over and over again, like I have friends who are more capable than I am because they're grew up maybe playing guitar from a very early age, but like if I'm writing songs for people 3 times a week, after a couple months, I'm like, bro, I've reused all the tricks up my sleeve. Like, if I'm writing for me, I'm like creatively invested, and I'll do something that's like weird and like not correct. Just like some half steps and some dissonance. Try something out of the box or out of the norm to see how it goes.
But if I'm writing for somebody else, they want me to just give them kind of. Well, if I do any of that, they go, well, let's keep it more centered, and then it's like I'm just using the same bag of tricks that I have 3 times a week for a couple months.
And so you said you got kind of into like creative writing and like had all these pictures of like how to come up with a story and narrative. Do you kind of put that in your songwriting where your songs or albums are kind of trying to tell a story, or is that kind of still separate from when you make music?
Definitely, but it's like a madness. It's like being inflicted with a madness when you first start songwriting, because the older you get and the more songs you write, for me, the farther away from a clear-cut narrative story structure I get. Like, I'm still telling stories, but a lot of times now even recently, what I'm interested in is poetry again. Like, I want to sing a story, but it doesn't necessarily have to make sense to you. Like, you can kind of take it and make it what you will, but I'm not gonna like spell it out like I'm teaching a class. Like,
you're not gonna have one concrete meaning to it and have people follow that. You're kind of leaving it up to interpretation, and people can piece it together.
Rather than being like, I woke up, got in my car, we had lunch, didn't get very far, we broke up, now I'm sad, we broke up, I want to be glad, why did you leave me, why did you leave me? And it's like, it would be me just walking you through exactly the steps of the song. Whereas I'm kind of more interested now in like, sit down, think about how you feel, write it out, and then let's sing that. That's interesting. Like, we'll have to make some changes, but like I've written a couple songs in the past couple years that are just like they shouldn't on paper like work,
Yeah.
and then they do, and it's like,
Yeah.
yeah.
So, what tips or like advice would you give to people who are just like starting off their music careers or want to start getting into music?
Well, it's tough. It's tougher now with the ebbs and flows of COVID and figuring all that out. But I think a big thing is ain't nothing to it but to do it. Like just start. Like, and if it's like I don't know where to start, like okay, well, what are you interested in? Do you want to play guitar? Do you want to sing? You want to sing? Go on YouTube and type in what are you interested in? Folk music. Type in generic folk guitar and listen to that. Try to sing over it. Write it down. Download it. Go to YouTube to MP3. Download that. Open up GarageBand and record it straight into the mic on your laptop. It'll sound like shit, but like do that. Just start.
It's a start. It's something.
Yeah.
Rather than
and
just
like,
an idea.
Yeah. COVID permitting, go to a show, like a smaller show. Go to like an open mic and don't perform. Just go and sit in. Go to, a singer-songwriter show. Get out there. Try and meet people. If you're not super social, maybe try and meet people online. But just like do it, because I'm a classic case of like I've been playing music for a very long time, but like I'm not classically trained. I never learned to play guitar, and now I'm like in the studio and someone's like, "Hey Bryan, you want to rip a solo on this?" And I'm like, "Yeah, sure." And I pick up the guitar. When I pick up the guitar, I have no idea what I'm going to do. I have zero clue. Like I don't have perfect pitch. I don't hear the song and go, "That's in B." Even if it was in B, I don't know where B is on a guitar. I have no idea. So I'll sit there for a while and just go beep beep, find some things that sound cool and go okay, sit with it for a second and then be like, okay, let me do like 10 takes in a row, loop me, and I'll just do 10 takes back to back. And then after like 30 minutes, I'll have something that's cool and quirky that I think I've had guitar players sometimes been like, that's a really cool part. And the reason why it's cool is because a guitar player would never play it like that.
Yeah.
So it's like, just do it. Just like force yourself to just do it. I mean, there are ways that you can start playing guitar easier if you want to just start trying to strum and sing. Maybe tune your guitar to drop D. So in standard tuning, just take that E string and tune it down to a D. And then you're in drop D and you can just bar chord stuff. And you can just put your finger over the whole chord and just bar chord it. And just find stuff that sounds good. That way it's a little less confusing than making a chord shape, which you should learn eventually, but it's a place to start. Or, you can look up open tunings. I use a tuning called Dad Fad a lot, which is D-A-D, F-sharp-A-D, which if I'm not playing any chords and I strum it, it is a chord. It's an open D. Yeah. And so that way I can play kind of simpler stuff, and it's kind of like built in that it's going to sound okay.
Yeah, and it's not as like complex or hard to learn as like all these technical forms and chords.
Yeah, it definitely will be more difficult to learn, but if you want to, I'm big on starting out with a win. I say that a lot in the studio, like, or when we're working on stuff, like, let's start out with a win. Let's get the good juices going first. Yeah. Before we tackle the hard stuff, let's start out with what's an easy, manageable task. Let's put that one up first and knock it out of the park. And then we're going into the rest of it going like, hell yeah.
Feeling good, yeah.
Yeah.
So, like, kind of platforms or the music industry today, a lot of it is like hearing a song on Instagram or TikTok and you hear this 15-second clip and you go and you want to listen to that. Do you think that is good for music in that newer artists or smaller artists can get discovered and people can learn about them? Or does it kind of take away from wanting an authentic connection and like telling a story and just people trying to come up with like songs that have like a catchy 15-second pop tune?
The truthful answer is I don't know. I don't think a lot of people know. It's scary. I've had a lot of conversations with people recently about like, what are we supposed to do right now? Like, what are musicians supposed to do? Just continue to release songs every week that are it's like putting change in a meter. It's like people listen to it for that week, maybe if you're lucky, and then the next New Music Friday, you're old news. Whereas like not that that's why it's hard to say because I don't know if I'm nostalgic for it, but I am nostalgic for. I grew up with the same 6 CDs in my car for years. Like I sat with certain albums for years, and when I would put them in my CD player, track 1 starts.
Yeah,
and it's like cool. This isn't the whole album.
And it's listening to the album, not
yeah.
And I think it's kind of like over time has almost gotten shorter. Like back in the day, you look at old artists; they have basically their entire career is just full albums, and it's always that big body of work. And then over time, singles kind of started to get more popular, and now we have people just playing like their favorite 15 seconds of songs in like short videos that they make. What do you think it's important for some artists to still try to hold on to that like full album, like authentic connection story format, or do you think it's going to inevitably keep getting shorter and shorter?
It depends. I think the answer to that is yes. Both. It's important to hold on to it, but I do think that we're caught between a rock and a hard place here because I don't necessarily I don't necessarily love that the music industry right now and art is being commodified by TikTok and like NFTs. But if you're not a big artist, if you're not like a really big artist, it's hard to make money. Especially without touring. Like these streaming services don't pay a ton, and especially if you're splitting it with a bunch of people. So like that's why like I'm not into the NFT stuff, and I'm not really into the whole like TikTok. I have a TikTok. I just post videos, archival videos. I'm not like setting out to make TikToks or like making a song that just has like a 15-second TikTok hook or whatever. But I get it. You know what I mean? Like if someone's making money, I have friends that have done the NFT thing and like made money from it, and I'm like, yeah, I don't really with it. It feels like cheapening the art to me. But if I needed the cash, like,
I would try the same thing.
I mean, yeah, it's better than going and you know pushing papers at a desk if that's something that you hate doing. You know, at the very least, you're making money doing something that you'd much rather be doing. It just sucks because it really is becoming like art is kind of becoming just like content, you know, and content has now become people have short attention spans, so it's content's being churned out at such a ridiculous rate that you know you're binge watching shows in a day. Like you know, you think a 3-hour movie is long, cool. Well, most people binge entire TV shows in like a day. It's like 10 hours. You're watching a 10-hour movie.
People watch shows in a day. They want, like, for entertainment, just use, like, 15-second clips from TikTok and just keep scrolling through that all day. And people are always, like, next thing, and not always just sitting with what they like or love.
Luckily, there are still people, you know, doing the album game who genuinely care about it. I mean, just off the top of my head, I know, you know, the 1975 is still a very, like, artistic band that really cares about an album, and you know, I think they grew up from a similar era, so it makes sense. My Mount Rushmore, all of those guys, I mean, which is, you know, Frank Ocean, Bon Iver, Justin Vernon, any Justin Vernon project, whether it's Big Red Machine, Volcano Choir, Bon Iver, and Father John Misty, a lot of those, you know, also shout out to like Iron and Wine and you know, Max Bemis from Say Anything. Like all those people are in it for the art and the album, and they're trying to build albums that are start to finish a journey.
Yeah,
you'll sit down, you'll listen to the whole thing. So if you're looking for that, it still exists. It's just harder to find and
not as popular,
and it's hard to do.
Yeah,
like if a 18-year-old kid came up to me who didn't really have, you know, if he didn't really have any money and was like, I want to make an album, I'd be like, don't. As much as I want you to, like, if you're trying to, like, get out there and get on the scene and, like, you don't have any money to spend, like, you need to make some singles.
Yeah.
Like you need to get like recognized or backed monetarily. You know, maybe, I don't know, if you have friends and family, or if you have some fans, maybe put out like a Kickstarter to make an album. But like albums are expensive.
Yeah.
It's like you got to pay. Think about like studio fees, engineer, producer, co-writers,
Any
mix,
promotion you do
master,
for it.
album artwork, promotion,
Yeah.
and then are you gonna make it? You're gonna physically make it? Well, then gear up for even more money, and also it taking a long time.
Yeah.
And so it's just not easy to do. So that's why Cops of Rock and Hard Place, because like I'd love it if the world was still albums and people truly cared. Everyone truly cared, and that was what was important. But the reality of it is, we're in a weird.
We're not really there anymore.
It's a weird time. I feel like a lot of people don't know what's next, because like this can't just continue.
Yeah.
It can't just continue. Like Spotify New Music Friday, like think about it. It hasn't always been around.
Yeah.
I remember in the Neighbourhood days, like I got a free Spotify account at South by Southwest 2012 because they were trying to promote it. Like I didn't have one. No one. I didn't know anybody that had one. I had an iTunes account, and we still made CDs.
Yeah.
Like we sold CDs on the road, and like none of us had that. We all had iTunes and probably some illegal streaming service too, but none of us had that. And now, fast forward to now, it's like Spotify, Apple Music, it's all streaming services, and it's been that way now for like 5-6 years. Like, but that hasn't been the changes. I'm just curious as to what's next.
And I think it's just kind of, that is cool because you never really know what's next. So it could be anything that's next, kind of. And when you're coming up with whether it's a new song or you're starting this journey of trying to come up with a full album, what does the creation of a song kind of look like? Do you have lyrics and then you start riffing on drums or guitar, trying to find something that works for that? Do you have the guitar first? Does it kind of change based on what project you're doing it for? What's that creative process like?
Totally. If it's like a band project I'm in, it could be any one of those things.
Yeah.
It could be me bringing something to the table, or somebody else bringing something to the table and being like, "Oh, that's awesome. This is inspiring. Let's work."
Yeah.
For my stuff nowadays, generally I have to be hit with inspiration first, like wanting to write about something. So the idea will come first, and then the rest of it is kind of like trying to hug mist. It's trying to bottle an emotion the entire time. And so lyrics, generally I'll kind of play guitar and just sing and see what happens, Like if someone was playing a guitar and was just like, how do you feel? Go. You're on the clock. And you were just like, I've been having a hard time walking around the streets. It's like, okay, cool. Well, it's a starting point, Maybe the melody will change. Maybe the lyrics will change. But at the very least, we got a starting point. We're moving here.
Yeah.
Let's keep it moving. And like, oh, that's interesting that my subconscious is talking about walking the streets. To me, that reminds me of a week ago. I was having a rough time, and I went walking around downtown. I just went for a little walk at like 11 p.m. And it's like, I'm from New York, so downtown LA is like downtown light is like New York light. But still, it's like 11 p.m. It's like me and homeless people and like cars going by and drunk people and all this shit. So there's something there.
Yeah.
That's like an idea for a song right there. Like I'm walking around trying to clear my head while I'm surrounded by chaos in the middle of the night. Like that's cool. We can start a song there. And all that came from just do it. Just like do it. Like what are you feeling? What's your subconscious wanting to say, wanting to express?
Almost just like what comes impulsively without thinking. Just like start doing it, don't think about it, and then what will come from that. Just start there.
Yeah. And if it's nothing, I don't force it anymore. If I'm not inspired and nothing's clicking, I put the guitar down and move on with my day. I'll be like, cool, I'm going to go get some food. Or like, cool, I'm going to play some video games.
And so have you learned to kind of have those days and know that those days will come? Or do you kind of get down or like feel unfulfilled when you have those days?
I'll get frustrated with myself sometimes just musically. If I'm trying to do something that's like just above my pay grade. It's like I'm on the guitar and I'm like, I hear the next chord in my head, but it's like a complicated chord with like a weird, seventh in there or like something, and I'm like, I don't know that. I'll like search for it, and if I can't find it and I can't find where it goes, I'll get frustrated with myself musically. But for the most part, I know that it ebbs and flows. And if it's band stuff, and I know that, hey, today's not my day lyrically and melodically, let me hop on the bass. Like, I got rhythms in my body. Like, I could play drums, I could play bass or drums at any drop of a hat, whenever.
Yeah.
It's
a
like,
lot
I
of
just
instruments are
feel
kind of
that.
like connected in these ways that a lot of people don't really realize. But for the most part, like, if you have a good baseline of instruments you know how to play, you can kind of from there learn like tons of different instruments. And so
Yeah. That's the thing too, is like, a lot of my guitar playing and bass playing literally came from rhythm. So when I first picked up a guitar, my right hand was solid.
Yeah.
I was like, that's why when I was bar chording, I would play something and someone would be like, dude, you've been practicing. It sounds awesome. And I'm like, what this hand's doing is not complicated. But what this hand's doing is very like rhythmically oriented. Like I'll start playing something that's like triplets in 5/4. And someone's like, whoa. And I'm like, yeah, but what this hand is doing is just this. I'm just bar chording, and then I'm going down 2 frets, back 2 frets, down 4 frets, up 2. Like, I'm not, so that kind of, but that, gives you the confidence you need to then dive in and be like, cool, I know that this hand is solid, and I can pick fast, and I can finger pick, and I can do all this. So it gives me the confidence to do this, and it also lends itself to be like, cool, now I can. Someone's on drums and bass, cool, I'll pick up the guitar.
There are like basic music building blocks that can kind of expand into learning more complex stuff, become more abstract, and eventually lead to more sounds.
Yeah, and less is more. Also knowing when like a part doesn't need more gunk,
You don't always have to come up with the hardest guitar chord you've ever learned. It can just be like a super easy, just like you said, sometimes in the studio, just not even doing anything when you're left there, just strumming once and just doing that for a song. Yeah,
there's that U2 documentary that I forget when it came out, but it's I think it's With or Without You. It's the guitar solo at the end of With or Without You, and it's the Edge talking about it, and it's like 2 chords. It's chords. He's playing and he's just strumming, and he was like, "Yeah, I could have ripped there." He's like, "I could have ripped a solo there." He's like, "But isn't it cooler that I didn't?" And it's like, yeah, it's way cooler that you just like the part built up to that part, and then he just shit on his 2 chords.
On 2 chords.
Yeah, and it's like, that's cooler. That is like, that's like steezier. Like the vibe of that is like, oh, that's badass. Like you don't even give a fuck. You're like, I picture a guy leaning back on a bar in like a leather jacket, like smoking a cigarette, playing those 2 chords, because it's like, I don't give a shit. It's like, wow, all right.
And so like people when they just see you, obviously one of the first things that might stand out about you is you have a lot of tattoos. Do you worry that ever kind of gives someone a first impression of who you are, what your music's like, without ever trying to listen to it?
Musically, no, that never really crosses my mind. The only time that I ever even have that thought, where I'll even remember that I have like tattoos on my face, is when I'm on tour and I'm in like the bad part of like the South.
Yeah.
And if we like show up somewhere and I like walk into a gas station and I'm like, la di da di da, and I'm wearing like, because I'm in a van, so I'm wearing like short shorts and like a tank top and like Crocs. And then I'm just like, because my legs are fully tattooed, my arms, I got tattooed on my face and my neck. If my head is shaved, I have tattoos on my head. So I like walk in and I'm like, la-di-da-di-da. And in my head, I'm thinking about the nerdiest you could possibly imagine. I'm like prepping for a Dungeons and Dragons session that we're gonna have when we get to the hotel.
Yeah.
But I'll walk in and I'll see people be like, "Who? This guy's not from around here. Who is this guy?" And those are the most I'm aware of it. And I'm like, "Oh, shit, I forgot."
Mm-hmm.
Like I'll wonder why someone's looking at me, and then
So-
I'll be like, "Oh, great."
So you clearly have lots of tattoos. Where did your tattoo journey kind of start? Like, what was your first tattoo, for example, that you got?
My first tattoos were actually done by a musician named Jake Hayes, who, good friend of mine, great musician, grew up in the similar area once I moved to California. Drew, who was in La Bouquet, also plays bass for him. He tattooed me when I was 17 in his house. His dad is, I think his name's David Hayes, or his dad is the guy from the movie Airplane. There's a famous movie from like the 80s named Airplane. That's like a famous comedy.
Yeah.
And his dad is the guy who saves the plane. And his mom is Sherry Curry from the famous band The Runaways. And he tattooed me at his house and did a good job. He did a couple. He did like an eye in the center of my chest. And then my grandparents from back east all have animals on their tombstones. So cardinal, butterfly, hummingbird, and then there's an eye, a sun with a green eye in it, which is, this one's supposed to be like I see with my heart, not my head. And then this one's kind of just like, for looking over, I'm not really a religious guy, so like the sun with like an eye in it is kind of like the closest thing to me to a god or something like that. So like just keeping watch over my family's spirits, memories, even. But yeah, it was in his house, and then I eventually went to tattoo shops, and they kind of touched this stuff up, and then made it into a half sleeve, and then made it into a full sleeve, and then it was off to the races.
So
but that's where it started.
Have you just kind of gotten them like for fun because you like the look, or do you try to wait until you have inspiration or like a meaning behind the tattoo that you want to get?
I'm fully have moved into the zone of they don't have to mean anything. Like a lot of them do, and a lot of like my first ones did. But at a certain point, like some of my favorite tattoos are like, I have a Crystal Geyser water bottle tattooed on my leg, and there's 3 drinks in a row. There's a coffee pot, a Crystal Geyser water bottle. This is liquid death water. And then a Coors Banquet beer can, all next to each other. And like, what is that? I mean, those are just like my 3 drinks of choice. You know what I mean? It doesn't mean anything. Yeah. I have a tattoo on my right thigh that says Frank Wood Mac, which is for Frank Ocean and Fleetwood Mac. So at this point, I mean, this is just like paint cracking. There's an artist out of New York that just does like the only tattoos that they do are like paint cracking, and so like you get something like that, but a different one every time, somewhere on your body or multiple or whatever. And it's like, what does that mean? Nothing really, but sometimes you find meaning in things down the road, And also, just like that, that's purely like aesthetic. Like I really like how that looks, and like blue is just like I really like the color blue, and also sometimes I feel blue. But like this spider up into this spider web up here, it's like just
looks cool.
That's just for fun. Like, and those are your favorites. I mean, I have a lot of like really meaningful things on me for family members and friends and things that have meant a lot to me in my life. But at this point, like, I've done all that. You know what I mean? There's not, like, if someone was like, why don't you get something, a tattoo of meaning for this? I'd be like, I already have it. There's, like, nothing in my life besides, like, maybe a future child. Yeah.
Do you have a tattoo of yours that's your favorite?
That's a good question. Favorite. I just got a couple that are favorites right now. One of them is a mushroom plant because for my mental health, I've been microdosing mushrooms, which I looked into it, and for a lot of people that can kind of take the place of an SSRI, which is what you take if you're depressed sometimes. And there are different SSRIs, but whenever I took those when I was young, I'd go to therapy and I would, see a psychiatrist who would give me SSRIs, and I would take them, and I would feel better, but I'd be like foggy.
Yeah,
and I already kind of sometimes feel like that, like I'm watching my life happen rather than being the person living it. So that made it even worse. So I've been microdosing mushrooms, so I got that. And then I got Felix the cat taking a tab of acid. Those are the two most recent ones that I've gotten. And then this. So those three are now my current.
Mm-hmm. And so
with
this new experimentation, kind of microdosing mushrooms, what have you learned about yourself from that, or does that kind of help with your creative process at all, or is it just something you kind of use, like you said, to get a better mind state and just kind of calm down for a bit?
Yeah. So actually taking mushrooms, has helped me become a happier person and unlocked a part of my mind of who I really am, not being ashamed of stuff. I've struggled with like body dysmorphia a lot of my life, and like it led to me like not taking my shirt off at the beach with friends.
Yeah.
And like 8-10 years ago when I took mushrooms for the first time, I kind of got past stuff like that. That's just an example of the sorts of things that I kind of learned to love myself. Microdosing mushrooms, though, is so less intense. Like, if you're doing it correctly, you don't feel it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, you don't know that you're microdosing. It's not. There's no trippy stuff. There's no visuals.
No
it's
different
nothing.
Feeling than just living unaffected.
Yeah, you're just the best. How you know it's working is like if, let's say, you took them. You've been taking them every 3 days, and you take them like in the morning or something. And one day you're just having a great day. The day's going well, and you're like happy with how the day's going, and happy with yourself. And you stopped and were like, that probably played a factor. But that's it. There's no psychoactive when you microdose.
There's no extra feeling of like knowing that, or like there's no obvious feeling of like, oh yeah, this is when they're working, this is when they're not. It's just kind of a constant ambient thing. Yeah, it would be very akin to taking an SSRI. It's totally not. You hear mushrooms and you think like trippy, but microdosing mushrooms is like none of that. You just how you know it's working for you is if it's if you just, for me, if I'm just like gradually feeling my mood improve and my life improve and being depressed less when there's kind of just for no reason, which is something that I've just struggled with, just depression, just clinical depression of just like you're depressed and people are like, why, what happened? And you're like, oh no, that's not how it works. Like nothing, like there's no reason. I just am. And so if you feel stuff like that getting better, and it helps, especially I started doing it even more during the first pandemic because I live alone, and living alone can get very like you're in your own head and you're overthinking everything. And when I started doing that, I don't know, it just gradually helped like a little bit, Yeah. And so like you kind of said, when people hear mushrooms or hear talk about these mental problems, the substance solutions people find to it, everyone's kind of like, oh, or like taken aback, or like finding trippy, or like something that shouldn't really be done. What do you think might happen or could happen to kind of change how people see it and really have people learn that it can just help and not always have to be some crazy negative thing? Yeah. Well, I think
Yeah, people just have rightfully so. A lot of people have abuse problems, myself included, with alcohol, but not with this stuff. And so I think a lot of people think when you talk about drugs that haven't been legal, they're like, he's getting into drugs. And it's like, well, Charles, haven't you been taking like Xanax every day for the last 7 years? And it's in an ideal world, we'd all be perfect all the time. And just for me and for, a large amount of people, microdosing mushrooms can kind of help in the same way that an SSRI helps with your kind of serotonin levels and stuff like that. But I think, just the main misconception people have is when you talk about it, they're imagining the trip.
Yeah.
They're imagining you taking a full dose, becoming a shaman and fucking seeing and taking a dose. And while I also recommend that, that's not what I'm doing. I've only done that twice in my life, and those are very much so to have a good group of people around you, be in a good headspace. And it's not acid. Acid is a little crazier, in my opinion. I would not recommend acid, but I would recommend shrooms. But I get it. If someone hears it and goes whoa, I understand that there's a little asterisk that needs to be put on it. That's oh, no, not like that.
And so when you hear that, are people kind of surprised by it, and you're like, yeah, I get that reaction, or do you kind of try to explain to them that? Do you try to explain what you're doing and try to explain that there can be other effects than just getting high beyond belief?
Yeah, less and less so. I think when I first started doing it, I had to do a lot more explaining, but now it's it's decriminalized.
It's becoming
in a lot
more
of
accepted,
places.
kind of.
Yeah, I think it's I could be misspeaking, but I'm pretty sure it's decriminalized in California now. And I think it's been decriminalized in Canada for a while.
Yeah.
And stuff. And so, it's kind of just there are properties to it. I mean, I was reading this thing, I don't even know how true it is, but it was this thing on how psilocybin, or however you say it, can help. It's anti-inflammatory as well. So it just can help with sicknesses too. Yeah. Whatever. I'm not saying that's 100% true, but I think less and less having to quantify it to people, because nowadays I'll tell people, and sometimes someone will be like, I've been meaning to do that. My therapist was mentioning something, or someone's oh, awesome. Yeah. My friend Greg does that, or whatever, and it's you can buy them. I can buy them online.
Yeah.
I also know someone who makes them into chocolates, but I can literally place an order.
It's just so
for mushrooms
accessible now
online, and they'll be here, and all of that's legal somehow. And they're in little capsules that are you used to have to put mushrooms on a pizza and eat it, and it's poison in your stomach, and now it's I just take a little 100 milligram pill once every 3 days, and I just generally feel better.
So those are kind of all the questions I had for you today. Thank you so much for coming on. It's been a great time. And where can people find you? Instagram, websites, anything you have, Spotify. Just go plug it, let them know where they can find you.
Cool. Well, first of all, thanks for being so flexible with all the scheduling stuff.
Yeah, no problem.
I had to get all my lights fixed, so I appreciate you being flexible. Olivver the Kid with 2 V's. Pretty much everywhere. Twitter, Instagram, TikTok even. Hey, now.
Okay.
You can check out my old band, La Bouquet, Labouquet. We have two albums that we put out before we disbanded. 1990 Nowhere is a band I'm in right now. We just opened for Angels and Airwaves on tour last year with Bad Sons. And Olivver the Kid, I got some songs on the Said the Sky album that's coming out in February, and I may or may not be helping out on his tour in some capacity. So keep your eyes peeled for that.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you again for coming on, And yeah, it's been a great time.
Cool. Thanks, man.
I wanna have it all